Right, great. Good evening to all of you. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for being here with me in a new week. And of course, starting a new part of these classes. And well, given that we're about to start a new section in the TOEFL exam, of course, it's always a pleasure to be with you. And of course, to discuss together this very interesting topic, right? So let me please stream this class to YouTube. And then we're going to start with our tonight's topic. But if you look at the link that I sent to the WhatsApp group, then you have realized already what are we going to be discussing tonight, and that's the reading section. Okay, so let me please do this very quickly to access this. All right, very good. Okay, here as well. Okay, there as well. All right, here too. And then, yeah. Okay, very good. So we're ready to start. And what can I tell you about this section? You know, people find this to be a little bit difficult at the beginning because we are not normally used to read English in academic settings. Of course, we are used to read like literature, like, you know, normal literature like novels or, well, people like to read science fiction. They love to read things like, I don't know, well, it could be biographies or things of that sort. But of course, when you come to this section, you're going to realize that the material you have to read is totally different because the material is going to be academic related. That is to say, you're going to be reading scientific articles. You're going to be reading social science discussions on this topic. All right. And as I say, it's going to be a very different experience. But anyways, trust me, it's going to be very much easy. Let me please stop my screen just a little bit. Just want to move my window here because it's very warm, hot tonight. Great. Now we can start. Awesome. So let me share my screen with you, and we're gonna start tonight. Okay, let's go. Let me take this out. It's necessary for you to watch it. Great. There you are. So let me over here my presentation that I have prepared for you. And let us go with the reading section, okay? So look at this. The reading section, dear students, is a very much interesting topic to discuss. And I want to say right from the beginning that this week is going to be a little bit more theoretical, okay? Don't get surprised about that because we have a lot of material to cover, a lot of things that I would like to discuss with you before we practice for this section that, as I say, although it's quite practical, of course, it needs to have a very much strong theoretical background, and that's what I want to render to you in the following classes. Okay, so let us start with that. All right, great. There I am. So let us start with some general aspects, all right, on this section that I think are going to be very much appropriate for you. So in the reading section, as I was talking about, you're going to be assessed at how well you can read and understand the kind of material that is used in an academic environment. As I say, it's different to novels and to biographies, let's say, or science fiction books, because normally there you have some sort of narrative, right? In this case, that is not going to be the case. You're going to have to read, let's say, factual readings, texts that are conveying information and data, well, most normally. So get used to that, okay? You're going to be very much familiarized with it later. So, look at this. It says it includes 3 to 4 reading passages. And of course, that is very much, reasonable, right? Because when you think about it, in the reading section, you'll have to read different materials. And here, what I'm saying is that you're going to receive whether 3 or 4 reading passages to read. And now each of these passages is going to be approximately 700 words long. But if you think about that number, of course, it's way more, it's way longer or larger than before, because until this point with you, we've been analyzing very short texts or even no texts at all. So the idea is that you're going to notice in this part, of course, the reading material you're going to have to approach and to confront is going to be substantially large. And that is something that you have to, as I say, get used to it as well. Now, of course, maybe you're wondering, how am I going to be punctuated in this section? And the response is very easy, actually. Of course, as I say, you have to read from 3 to 4 reading passages that are, as I say, related to academic subjects. And then the idea is that you have to respond 10 questions per passage. That is to say, when you have, for example, a first reading passage that is about, let's say, I don't know, well, philosophers of the 17th century, for example, then you're going to have to respond 10 questions about that same passage. That is to say, philosophers of the 17th century, all right? And the same for the second reading, for the third, for the fourth, if you get a fourth, right? Because as I say, you get from 3 to 4. And I'm going to explain that variation later, trust me. But the idea at the end is that you have to indeed, well, read passages and then to respond 10 questions per passage that are related to that passage, okay? Now, I want to discuss something very much important. I think that it's way average and common concern, which is what happens if you're not very much familiarized with the topic of your reading passage. Some people, for example, are, you know, social science lovers, or they love, for example, mathematics, or they are very much fond of, I don't know, art or philosophy. But what happens if in your reading passages, as I say, you've received, for example, something that you have never listened about or you've never been very much interested about, as for example, let's say you like mathematics, but your reading passages are all of them about biology, chemistry, and history, and none of them is about mathematics. Or worse, what happens is, what happens if you are not familiarized whatsoever with that topic? For example, you never liked physics in high school, and then very much ironically, the topic of your reading passage, or one of the topics of your reading passages, is physics. You shouldn't be worried about that, okay, dear students? You shouldn't have any type of actual concern about that. Why? Because all the information, and listen very well to this, you need to answer the questions will be included in the passage you receive. For example, let's say that you don't like physics. You never liked physics in high school. You were always struggling with that. You hated formulas. You hated, I don't know, triangles and circular movements and the straight lines and things of that sort, right, that you see on physics. If you didn't like that, well, doesn't matter, because let's say that your passage was about, I don't know, Newton's laws. That, right, you know that Newton's law are certainly one of the most normal and average topics to be discussed in physics classes. Now, if your reading passage is about Newton's laws, then that means that they are going to be asking you questions about Newton's laws, because that is what was included in your passage. Now, for example, if they never said in your reading passage, when was Sir Isaac Newton born, then don't worry about a possible question asking, when was Isaac Newton born? That is not going to happen. They're not going to ask things that are not included in the passage. Or, I don't know, if they never talked about, let's say, I don't know, if they never talked about singularity theories, right, that are all a part of physics and cosmology, you are not going to be asked about that. They're not going to say who postulated the singularity theory, the singularity theory in the 17th, or I don't know, whatever. They're not going to be asking about that. They're going to be asking about material that you have received in the reading passage. As I say, if the reading passage was all about the three Newton's laws, then they're going to be asking about that, okay? What they give you, not what you should know, or it's not as if they were expecting you to know something. No, they want you to read, and with the material they give you, out of what they give you, you have to respond to questions, okay? So no, don't worry about any possible, let's say, blunder of yourself if you have not gotten very much, well, information on that topic, okay? Now, another thing that people ask very much commonly is, what happens if I do not understand a word in the reading passages I'm going to be confronting? Very normal, it happens to everyone. And you shouldn't be worried about that as well. Why? Because there is a glossary feature in the reading section, but let me explain that. It's not as, for example, let's say you do not know what the word objection means, right? Objection, which means some sort of very much cast down and let's say non-optimistic state or mood or mental state, whatever, if you don't understand that word and it is used in your reading passage, there's no way for you to know what that word means because it's a generic word. You cannot, for example, click it 2 times and then to receive a definition. Sadly, that doesn't work like that. The only type of words you can actually look for in the glossary feature, as I say, that is available below your reading passages is an endemic word. You know what is endemic, right? The adjective endemic. It describes things that are particular of regions or let's say particular societies, places, peoples, civilizations. For example, imagine that you are in Europe, you are European, right? And you have, I don't know, lived in Portugal your entire life. But in Portugal, people do not speak English as well, right? Not all Europeans speak English, certainly. Therefore, they have to take the TOEFL exam as well. So they are very much separated from this culture, right? So imagine that in the reading passage, you receive a topic about South American, I don't know, cultures, which of course would pertain to some sort of anthropology class. If that's the case, probably in the reading passage, you're going to get some word like chaman. You know what is chaman, right? Chaman is some sort of magician, right? In South America, I think that all of us know that. So, but what happens for a Portuguese person? Does he know that? I mean, probably has never listened to that term before in his entire life. And it's not his fault because there's no way. It's not part of his culture, not part of his environment, it's not part of his natural state of things. It's not just part of him. So he's not going to be able to know that word. So he can access, as I say, the glossary feature, and he can look for that. And that type of word that is endemic, that is some sort of a cultural or totally independent data is going to be available in the glossary feature. But things like generic words, things that advanced words are not going to be included, okay? I'm so sad about that, but that's the way it works, and I have to tell you, okay? So please, if you want to improve your understanding of words, of course, you can just practice by yourself, try to read, as I say, scientific materials, scientific reading passages, and go about selecting words that you do not understand. Try to take a notebook. That's what I did when I was preparing myself for the exam. Take a notebook and write down every single word you do not understand and memorize it and try to apply it in real contexts and situations. And that's going to be very much helpful, trust me. Okay, great. So is there any question with regard to, and there's something that I was forgetting to talk about here before you make your questions. Notice here it says you can receive from 3 to 4 reading passages, right? And something that I didn't mention is that you also can have from 54 to 72 minutes to respond and read all the material in this section. And notice that when I say from 3 to 4 reading passages and from 54 to 72 minutes to respond to all that and to approach all that material, what I'm saying is that, hey, you know, there is a variation here. And so how do you explain that variation and why does it happen? The reason is very simple. There is something, dear students, that I want to talk to you about in the TOEFL exam that is called the experimental version of the exam. This experimental version of the exam is basically an extra passage to receive in your material. Let me explain it this way. Normally, okay, listen very well to my words. Normally, in the reading passage, you receive 3 reading passages, okay? I repeat, in the reading section, you receive normally 3 reading passages, 30 questions to respond, and 54 minutes to respond and read all the material, okay? That's for the normal version of the reading section. Now, if you receive the experimental version of the reading section, okay, not talking about the normal one, but the experimental version, you're not gonna have 3 passages to read, but 4 instead. You're not gonna respond to 10 questions, excuse me, to 30 questions overall, but to 40 questions. And then you have 72 minutes instead of 54 to respond and read all the material. Notice that, right? It's very much different. And the reason for this, as I say, is that think about ETS as a normal enterprise or company. What they want to do is to improve their services, right? So when they give you this extra passage in a reading section and these extra questions and this extra time for you to perform this, the only thing they are doing is to use you, right? I mean, I know it sounds bad, but it is as if you were their hamster, basically. because they are testing with you new types of questions, new mechanisms that we are not even going to discuss actually this week, right? Because they are new, they are innovative, they are totally well unseen. So the idea is that if you receive this experimental version, that as I say, it's merely a new reading passage with new 10 questions and more time to respond and read all that material. If you receive this, and as I say, it's likely going to be very much different to what we're going to be learning this week. Don't worry, don't get troubled. Why? For the very simple reason that, dear students, you are not going to be punctuated in this extra passage. Let me explain. As I say, normally the reading section consists of merely 3 reading passages. This 4th one is just an extra one that you can receive, you just may receive. It is likely, it doesn't happen to everyone. And there's no way to know if you're going to receive it, but if you do, that for an extra reading passage is not going to be considered towards your final score. That is to say, you are not going to be evaluated in your responses. It doesn't matter if you respond to those 10 questions correctly, because they are not simply considered. The only thing they want with your responses for that part of the exam, this experimental passaging stuff, is to test, as I say, their new mechanisms, their new types of questions, but you are not actually evaluated on that, okay? So as I say, you don't have to worry about it. If you respond those questions correctly, well, great, you are a very good test taker. Now, if you don't, it doesn't matter because, as I say, they don't evaluate you. The only thing they always take into consideration for evaluating your performance are the first 3 reading passages and the 30 questions that correspond to those passages. And of course, as I say, this other extra passage is not considered. It's just a matter of, let's say, help and, well, some sort of information survey to ETS, no more than that. Okay, and that's how it works. And as I say, this is totally random, aleatory. You cannot know if you receive it or not. It's just aleatory. Okay, but if you do, don't worry, just perform it. And by the way, don't think that some people always say, you know, oh, okay, so if I receive 4 passages, the number 4 is always going to be the experimental one. And they say, okay, so if they're not going to be evaluating me on those questions, I'm not going to respond them. But you shouldn't do that, because not necessarily the 4th reading passage is going to be the experimental one. You're going to receive 4, yes, but you do not know which of those reading passages is the experimental one. So respond to all the passages and all the questions as you receive them with the best of your effort, with the best of your conscience, because if you do not do so, maybe you say, okay, this is the experimental one. I'm not going to pay attention to it. I'm going to go to the other ones. Maybe you guess incorrectly, and that one was actually a normal reading passage that you were to be evaluated into. So you messed it up, right? But as I say, it's totally impossible to differentiate and know which one is the experimental one. So please perform on all the reading passages and questions they give you. Okay? Any question with regard to this, dear students? Anything that I could clarify? Something. Please tell me. I want to give you some time as I respond here to my coordinator that is sending me a message. Any question, please, my dear students, as Daniela, Grisel, Danilo, Liliana, Arlette, any question with regard to the reading passage? Excuse me, with regard to the reading section? Tell me. Okay, it's clear. What about the rest of you guys? Clear? No questions? Okay, very good. So I think that we can continue then with the class. Great. Let us go. So now that we have discussed these general aspects, let me talk to you about how this actually looks like on the exam, because of course we need to understand how the menu works, right? So look at this. I'm gonna reboot this thing because I think it's better if you practice from the beginning, okay? Great, so let me show you how this is going to look like on the actual exam. So look at this, dear students. Here you have what is going to be appearing on your screen, okay, on the exam. On one side of your screen, you're going to have the reading passage. Now, look at this passage. It's long, right? Look at it. And it's still going down, right? Almost 1,000 words. It's a very long essay or reading passage. Now, we're going to talk about that. That is to say, if you need to read it entirely, we're going to talk about that, don't worry. But what I want you to see is that, yes, it's a considerable passage. It's lengthy, okay? Look what is on the left side. You have the questions, all right? And as I say, you have 10 questions per passage. And all of these questions, by the way, as you can see, are multiple choice. Look at it. The only thing you have to do in your responses for this section is to choose the correct answer. That is to say, the answer you consider to be the correct one, right? You don't have to type your responses if you were wondering so. You don't have to type your responses. There's no going to be a question that says, type your response, what do you think about this? No, it's not going to happen. Multiple choice. The only thing you do is to choose the answer you consider to be correct. Now, what I can tell you here as well is that these questions, dear students, although they are all going to be multiple choice, they are going to be following different mechanisms, all right? Different mechanisms in the sense that, you know, when you think about them, for example, in this question, look at it. I just can choose one answer, right? Look at it. I cannot choose 2 or 3. In other questions, as we're going to be discussing throughout the week, you can respond, or you can choose actually 2, 3, even 4 of them. And that's normal, okay? That's fine. That's how it works. But as I say, you're never going to be writing or typing your response, but you're going to be choosing whether it is 3, 4, 1, 2 responses, okay? But always choosing. Very good. So another thing you have to know, very importantly, oh, I'm not sure why it says, oh, sorry, I want to reboot this. It's just that I chose the practice mode. I want just want the quiz mode. Okay, great. So as I was telling you, look at this. There are some buttons here, very important. Okay. As you can see on your screen, that day you'll have these 2 buttons. One of them says next, and that's how you access the next question. Now, before I talked about that, let me show you this. Look at the right corner of my screen. The right corner contains a chronometer, right? And this is very, very good for me. I just find this to be delightful. Why? In the other sections in the TOEFL exam, ETS is very much strict with regard to the time because they administer it for you. They tell you, okay, you know, for this part, you're going to have this time, point. Or for this part, for this task, you're going to have this time, point. But in this case, they give you the entire 54 minutes for you to administer. So on the actual exam, this chronometer you can see there is not going to stop until the 54 minutes are over. And that means that you can administer how much time you invest on any particular independent question. For example, if you, let's say, think about this question and say, oh, wow, this is very simple. And you respond the questions in 10 seconds, right? This one, you respond this question in 10 seconds. So, oh, wow, very easy. And you press next. Maybe you find that the second question, this one, is a little bit more complicated. So you say, okay, well, it's more complicated. I'm going to spend here 3 minutes. You can do it because nobody tells you if you, or nobody tells you how much time you can spend there. You decide because, as I say, they give you the 54 minutes. In this case, of course, it was reinitiated just because it's a simulator, right? But on the exam, as I say, it never stops. You administer how much time you want, or excuse me, how much time you can use or you use in every particular question. The only limit or boundary you have is the 45 minutes. Now, as I say, for example, maybe you can do this, it's possible. You have 30 questions to respond, right, normally. So you could spend, let's say, I don't know, you could spend, I don't know, 1 minute responding I don't know, 25 or let's say 29. You can spend 1 minute responding 29 questions if you want, and to spend 1 minute, or excuse me, I'm gonna repeat it. You can spend, yeah, like 1 minute of responding 29 questions, and to use the rest of the time, because you have 54 minutes, right? 53 minutes if you want for responding the last question. That is totally possible. Of course, I mean, probably it's not factually plausible, but it could be possible if you manage to respond to all the questions, like the 29 questions in 1 minute, and you come to the last question, number 30, and you say, oh, I have 53 minutes. You can think about the questions for 53 minutes if you want. As I say, this is just an illustration, right? For me to illustrate my point that you can decide. Nothing is going to stop you. Nothing will put a barrier on you, okay? So as I say, administer as you want, as you prefer. Of course, knowing that at the end, you have to respond to 30 questions, yes or yes, if you want to, of course, complete the section, okay? So now, as I say, with these buttons, you access the next question. So you respond this one, you say, okay, next. But now, if you notice, there is another button. It says previous, okay? And in this previous button, you can come back to the last question. I think you have already guessed that, right? Previous question, and you notice that this is something very much uncommon in the TOEFL exam. They do not allow you to go back. We were last time in the writing section, right? So when we practiced the writing section, I told you, right? When you come to the second essay in the writing section, you cannot go back to the first one. In this case, you can go back as much as you want. For example, let's say at some point you find a question that you find a little bit difficult, and you are, I don't know, undecided. You say, I just find this to be a little bit complicated. Okay, you press next. You leave this question in blank. You respond the other questions, right? And when you want, if you're able to, you press previous and you come back to that question and you respond it, right? You can do that. Okay, it's up to you. Now, if you ask me, do I recommend you to do that? Well, no, I don't. Why? Because if we are very sincere with us, dear students, it's very difficult to come back to respond these blank questions. For example, let's say we are in the question number 3 of the first reading passage right now, right? So if we leave this one in blank and we continue and continue and continue and continue onto the question 30, let's say, when you were there or when you are there, you are going to be probably out of time, because this is a very, very much tricky section with regard to the time. Although you administer it, you have to be very careful and very, very much, well, you have to be very much, let's say, concerned about how much time you're actually investing on any question, right? So as I say, better if you do not do that. And secondly, as you can see, you can go back, yes, but question by question, better said, one by one. Look at it, previous. So if you're in the question 30 and you left the question 4 in blank, you have to press that like 24 or 23 times, right, to come back to that question. So imagine it's going to take a lot of time. So probably you're not going to have time to do that. So better if you never leave any question in blank. Secondly, because you're students, I recommend you that when you're not sure about a question, guess. That is to say, look for the answer you consider to be most likely the correct one. Why? Because if you get it, fantastic, more points for you. If you don't get the correct answer by guessing, nothing happens, because there is no penalty in the TOEFL exam for wrong answers. The only thing that is qualified and punctuated are correct responses. Incorrect responses are simply omitted. They are not considered. So if you get it wrong because you are guessing, well, doesn't matter, you try. But if you actually find it, right, you found the correct answer by guessing, well, wonderful, right? More points for you, great. So as I say, better if you just always choose a response, even if you are guessing, okay? Go for the one that you consider to be most likely, okay? And that's it with regard to how the menu works. As you can see, it's a very simple and, well, an intuitive menu. But let me show you one more thing. So when you are, for example, as you can see, we're going next, right? So in this case, we are in the first reading passage. And remember that this passage is about corporate charitable giving. This is probably a topic about business classes. Who knows, right? I have not read this one, but we're in the question number 7. remember that per passage, we have 10 questions, which means that when we come to the question number 10, let me show you what happens. We're gonna be facing this. Okay, so now we are in the question number 10 of the same passage, corporate charitable giving, which means that this is the final question of this passage. So when we respond, let's say we choose this is this, when we go next, what's gonna happen? The new reading passage is gonna appear on your screen. Look at it, now it's a passage about the decline of the Maya. It's about history. Previously it was about business classes, right? But now it's about history. Look at it. So it's a very difficult topic or different topic in this case. And of course, you have a new set of questions, 10 different questions to respond for this passage. And maybe you're wondering, can you go back to the previous passage? Yes, indeed, as I told you, just press previous and you go back to corporate charitable giving. As easy as that. Well, afterwards, it's a very simple menu. As you can see, very intuitive. And what you do is, as I say, to respond one question by question until you come to the last part. And as I say, be very much careful when administering your time. This is totally up to you. Try to respond as fast as you can. But whenever you see a question that requires you to stay there for a while, you can do it. Always considering how much time you're going to have later for the future questions, okay? It is just a matter of preference and your own comfort, okay? Is there any question, dear students, with regard to the menu that we have analyzed tonight in the class? Anything with regard to this? Tell me. Questions? Anything? No questions?
I have one, Carlos.
Yes, please, Danilo, tell me.
How many questions are there for each essay?
10 questions. 10 questions. The response is 10 questions per passage. And yeah, I mean, even if you receive the experimental version in a fourth reading passage, that extra passage is also going to have 10 questions. Okay, so the amount of questions per passage is always very much stable. It's just 10. Okay, just 10 questions per passage. Yeah, very good. Yes, Grisel has another question. Please, Grisel.
Oh, yes, teacher. My question is, there are just two types of questions, right? The ones that are single choice questions and multiple choice questions, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, with regard to how to respond, to the mechanism to respond to questions, yes. But with regard to the questions themselves, like what types of questions there are, I can tell you there are 10 types of questions. And we're going to be discussing those 10 types of questions throughout this week. But yeah, I mean, with regard to how to respond and like the mechanisms for responding to questions, yes, you can have multiple choices that merely ask you to choose one answer. Others ask you to respond and choose 2, 3, or even 4 answers. For example, look at this question. It's a summary question. And this one, you are required to choose 4 answers. So you can choose 4. But yes, basically what you say, it's like one type of question that is multiple choice and requires you to merely choose one answer and the other one more than one answer. Yes, very much that.
Thank you, teacher.
Okay, my pleasure. Any other question, dear students? Any other thing that I could clarify here? No more questions? Okay, I guess you don't have more questions. It's fine. Let me show you. What happens next? The only thing we have to discuss now, dear students, is a very important thing, and I want to share that with you, okay? Let me go back to my presentations here, and let me show you something very important, the charge strategy to approach this section. Let us remember that this exam was first released in 1964, right? So imagine how many people have taken this exam so far, which is unimaginable, right? It's totally unimaginable. So people have come up with different strategies, techniques, and manners to approach this section. Now, the one that by experience I have found to be the most convenient one is this one, what is called the charge strategy to approach the reading section. And let me now share it with you. And here we're going to discuss some very important topics, okay? Let's go. So, following this strategy, dear students, what you are going to do once receiving your passages, or the first passage if you want, is to go directly to the first question and use the passage to respond, not reading the whole passage first. Let me explain it this way. Let me come back here to my beautiful simulator. Here I am. Okay. So think about this. When you are in this part of the exam, what most test takers do is to, for example, let's say they receive a passage, right, like this one. What most test takers do is to read the entire written passage until the end. And just when they have finalized, they respond the questions. Okay, just when they have finalized. That is what most people do. I think that approach is incorrect and inefficient. Why? Because think about this passage, dear students. I want to ask you something very much honest, and I would like to listen to your honest responses. Do you care about the decline of the Maya? I guess you do not, right? I do not care. Well, I mean, I maybe I do because I like history, but if I am in the exam, I do not care because I didn't go to take the exam to learn about the Maya people. I was not there for that. If I were wanting to learn about the Maya, I would just read a book on that topic and that's it. But I'm not here to learn about this, right? The only reason I'm receiving this passage, dear students, is for me to respond to questions they give me and to demonstrate that I'm able to understand the topic. That's it. I'm not wanting to learn it or to digest it and internalize it so that I can, you know, when the TOEFL exam ends, I can go to my friends and say, hey, do you know about the Maya? Like, of course, I do not want that because I am in the exam. And the only thing I want with the passage is to respond to questions and that's it. So what people do when they read the entire passage normally is that they try to learn about it, to actually learn about the topic. They want to memorize it, to understand it like super well. A very common thing because we are used to this, right? We are students at the university, high school. We are always studying in our jobs. But in this case, no, it's not a good manner to do this. Now, the charge strategy tells you, okay, the first thing you do when you receive this is not reading the passage. The first thing you do is to go to the question and you read what it asks you for. For example, look at this question. It says, according to paragraph 1, which of the following is not mentioned as an example of the advanced nature of the Maya? Now, as you can see, the same question is telling you, hey, according to paragraph 1, we want you to respond this question. So following the charge strategy, what you would do is to read merely the first paragraph so that you find the answer to this question. But notice that you are not reading the passage entirely. You are not reading the entire passage whatsoever. You're just using the particular part they mentioned and referred to in order to respond the first question you have gotten. No more than that. Now, this is very different if you notice, because you are, in this case, you are not reading at first, but you are reading as you respond because, okay, this question is asking you about the first paragraph. Well, you're going to read the first paragraph. And you know what? This is very important, dear students, because you're going to find that in the reading section, not all paragraphs are used for making questions because notice, the reading passage is divided into paragraphs, right? There is a space here, look at it. And here it's the second paragraph until this period, right? Then another space, third paragraph, until here, another period, fourth paragraph, and so on and so forth. The idea is that as you can see, not all paragraphs are going to be utilized in order to make questions. Therefore, if you read the entire passage, what's going to happen at the end is that you, dear students, are going to be reading material that is totally useless. As I say, you are not here to learn about this. The only thing you want with this reading passage is to have the enough information or to collect enough information to respond to questions. That's it. Okay? So as I say, follow this strategy. And now I want to mention two important components or elements of this particular strategy. Look at this once again. To follow this strategy is possible because all questions are released following the chronological order of the passage. Namely, the first question or the first two are going to be about the first paragraph of the passage. The third question about the second paragraph. The fourth question about the third paragraph, and so on. Therefore, you are going to be able to respond orderly without having read the entire passage beforehand. Like, look at this. It's beautiful. When I discovered this, I was thrilled. This is the first question of this passage, right? And as I read it to you, what does it say? It says, according to paragraph 1. So it's telling you, hey, the answer for this question, it's in paragraph 1. Okay, great. What happens if we go to the next question, question number 2? What is the second question going to be all about? Look at it. Why does the author use the phrase, especially for historians, in paragraph 1? So the second question and its second response, it's also in the first paragraph. So in order to respond to this question, you don't need to read the second paragraph yet. But what happens if you go to the third question? Look at it. According to paragraph 2, right, it's not the first one anymore, but 2, what can be inferred about the preclassic period of Mayan civilization? If you think about it, as I say, it's respecting the chronological order in which these paragraphs are organized. It's asking you about the first, the second, okay? And I say, sometimes the question is not even going to tell you, hey, according to paragraph 2, 3, or 4. But what you can do is, for example, imagine that in this new question, like in this one, it doesn't tell you that the correct answer is in paragraph 2, okay? It just tells you what was the likely relationship between the Olmec and Mayan civilization. If that happens, if the same question doesn't tell you where is the possible answer, in what particular paragraph it is, don't worry. The only thing you do is you go back to the last question and you see, oh, okay. So my last question told me that my response was in paragraph number 2. So you know that in the next question you're going to respond in this one, that, as I say, hypothetically, they are not telling you, hey, the correct answer is in this paragraph. But anyways, you have look at this previous question. You have seen, okay, this question is telling me my response is in paragraph 2. Therefore, my next question must be yes or yes in paragraph 2 or 3, even if the question doesn't tell you, because as I say, hypothetically, we are postulating that this question doesn't tell us, hey, is it according to paragraph 2? We are saying, no, this is not there. The only question here is, what was the likely relationship between the Olmec and the Mayan civilizations? If the question is just like that, and it completely omits this part, telling you in what paragraph to find it, as I say, given that all the questions are respecting that chronological order, even if they do not notify you about that in the question itself, you can simply, as I say, go back to the previous question and check out what paragraph was that question making a reference to, so that in the next question you say, okay, so if this question was asking me about the second paragraph, if I press next and my next question doesn't tell me what paragraph is said to respond, I can say, okay, it must be the second or the third one. No other option, because as I say, it's always in that order, in that sequence, all right? It's a very, very beautiful concept, and it's always respected, trust me. It's always like that, okay? So as you can see, that's the reason why the TOEFL exam, the charge strategy works so well, because it's well distributed, it's well thought, and I think that it's very efficient, all right? So any question with regard to this charge strategy, dear students, anything that I could clarify, please tell me. Arlette, Daniela, Danilo, Grisel, Liliana, questions about this?
No, teacher.
Okay, very good. What about the rest of you guys? Any questions about this type of strategy method we're using to respond to the reading section?
It's clear,
No?
teacher.
Okay, great. Good. Yes, a question? I see. No? Okay, great. No. Very good. So the only thing I want to clarify here in this strategy, dear students, is there is a question, and we're going to be discussing this this week, is that there is a question called the summary question. And it's normally the last question you approach. Let me show you. So for example, I'm moving, right? To the 6th, to the 7th, to the 8th, to the 9th question, like that and like that. So when you come to the next question, to the number 10, let me show you what happens. The 10th question is normally a summary question. And we're going to discuss this, okay, just in this case, it wasn't, okay. I'm gonna go back then to the previous questions. So normally, I mean, it's not every single time that, but normally, okay, I'm gonna custom practice this once again, answer and answer. Okay, let me show you, okay, for you to understand. So the last question normally is a summary question. And that summary question, what you have to do is to choose answers and, of course, responses that summarize the reading passage you have read. And maybe at that time you're wondering, hey, but if they're going to ask us about the passage entirely to make a summary about it, how can we use the charge strategy and not to be somehow harmed in this particular question? Why? Because maybe you say, okay, so if I'm not going to read the entire passage, then I cannot choose the correct answers in that type of question. That is a summary question, right? Because in order to make a summary, you have to be aware of everything, right? Of all the entire content you want to make a summary of. What happens in that case? I want to clarify this right now. You shouldn't worry, okay? You shouldn't be concerned about it. Why? Let me show you. This is the question I'm talking about, the summary question. Look at it. It says, an introductory sentence for a brief summary of the passage is provided below. Complete the summary by selecting the 3 answer choices that express the most important ideas in the passage. So answer choices do not belong in the summary because they express ideas that are not presented in the passage or are minor details in the passage. So they're going to ask you to choose, as I say, 3 of this set of, I think, 5 or 8 possible responses that summarize the entire reading passage with its main ideas. And now you say, well, how am I going to do that if I'm not reading the entire passage? Well, very simple. Listen very well to what I said. This question is about the main ideas of the passage. A summary doesn't cover everything. Remember that. A summary is just some sort of compilation of the most important data discussed in any type of topic. So as you can see here, in this summary question, what is going to happen is that all the information you're going to be collecting throughout your process to come to this last question is going to be useful, because I want to clarify one more thing here. Notice that when I'm following the charts strategy, I'm not saying that you're not going to read the passage. You are going to read the passage, and probably entirely. The only thing is that you're not going to read it at first without responding to questions. You're going to read it, but as responding to questions while you respond. You notice? You are going to read it, yes, at the end, yes, because as I say, normally questions ask you about the entire paragraphs, like all the paragraphs. And at the end, if you need to read, of course, a paragraph to respond to that question, at the end, you are going to read the entire passage, okay? Sometimes no, because as I say, some questions are not, or some paragraphs are not used to make questions, so that's fine. If that happens, cool, okay, cool, great, I like it. But it's not the same. It's not the same if you come to this summary question, because those paragraphs that are not used to make questions, dear students, are not even mentioned here, are not even considered, because they are things that are simply portraying unnecessary information, things that are simply minor details. And of course, given that you don't need to read them, you're not going to have any trouble here, given, as I say, all these multiple choices represent answers that stand as main ideas in the passage. And as I say, those paragraphs that you are not going to be asked about in the questions previous to this one are not, of course, or excuse me, are in that case main ideas. But the paragraphs that you are not going to be asked about or confronted with are simply relevant paragraphs that do not present important information. And that's the reason why I tell you in the first place not to read those passages by reading the entire passage, but merely reading the passages you need to respond to questions, right? And as I say, given that those passages you read contain the main ideas of the entire passage, you are going to be able to respond this part, the summary question, very smoothly and simply, okay? Because as I say, the main ideas are never omitted by following the charts strategy. And at the end, you're going to be probably, as I say, trust me, 90% of the time, reading the entire passage. The only difference is that you're not going to read it at first without responding to questions, but while you respond, you're going to be reading, okay? Is there any question, dear students, with regard to that I have just mentioned, something that I could clarify? Please tell me. No? Okay, no questions, I think. So tomorrow, dear students, we're going to start with this, the types of questions in the exam. And this is very important, okay? Very important. Because when you get this, trust me, all the questions are going to be a complete new world for you, dimension, because you're going to make sense of them. They're not just going to be tricky questions, but tricky questions that make sense, all right? So we're going to discuss this tomorrow, and we're going to continue with this throughout the week. And I'm also going to be preparing material for you to practice and to improve your reading, okay? So don't worry about that. But we're going to be proceeding with that tomorrow. Until that, we have finalized with our material so far. Okay, so please, before we finalize the class, I'm going to take your assistance and don't go until I do so. All right, and please help me with your kind responses to our traditional poll. And if you have any question, you are very much welcome. Okay, or any commentary, please. Okay, let's go. Let's look for your names and then we'll start. All right, here. So, is here present? Sorry, okay, so it's here present, my dear Grisel Perez.
Yes, teacher, here I am.
Thank you very much, Grisel. What about Daniela Lourdes?
Here, teacher.
Thank you very much, dear Daniela. What about Liliana Sonia?
Present.
Thank you very much, dear Liliana. What about Danilo Torrico?
Here I am.
Thank you very much, dear Danilo. What about Arlette Bustamante?
Hi, teacher. I'm here.
Okay, thank you very much, Arlette. And finally,
Thank
we
you.
have Daniela Castellanos. All right. Daniela was not here tonight. Okay, it's fine. Anyways, thank you very much, okay, for your kind responses. Tomorrow we're going to continue, okay, so please try to be very much early here in the class so that we can progress with this as we are expecting, okay? Have a wonderful night and see you tomorrow.
Thanks,
Thank you,
teacher.
teacher. You
Thank
too. See you
you.
tomorrow.
Bye.
Thank you very much. See you. Bye-bye. Thank you.